You can't seriously be standing up for the nightstand.
No.
I'm standing up for the woman I care about. High above the glowing lights of Beverly Hills stood the mansion of Daniel Carter, a man worth billions. Another 14-hour workday. Another room full of people pretending to like me. But tonight something was different. I didn't expect to find someone studying psychology in my backyard.
Oh,
You're Maria's daughter, right?
yes, sir. Lena.
Psychology?
He slammed his hand on the marble table so hard that the crystal glasses rattled. Enough. Daniel Carter's voice cut through the ballroom like thunder. More than 100 wealthy guests froze mid-conversation. The orchestra faltered. Cameras from business journalists slowly turned toward him. At the center of the room stood a trembling young woman in a simple blue dress. Her dark hands were clenched tightly at her sides as she fought back tears. Moments earlier, one of the guests had laughed and said loudly, "Daniel, surely you're joking. That girl is the maid's daughter." Daniel looked at the crowd, then back at the girl. "No," he said calmly. "I'm not joking." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Because the girl standing beside the billionaire CEO of Carter Technologies, the man worth nearly $8 billion, was Lena Williams, the daughter of his housekeeper. But none of those people knew how this story truly began. Months earlier, on a quiet evening in Beverly Hills, Daniel Carter stepped out of his black Tesla and loosened his tie as he walked toward his mansion. It had been a brutal day. Investors complaining. Board members arguing. Another tech company trying to buy out his firm. Success had its price. The mansion lights glowed warmly as he stepped inside, but the silence greeted him like an old friend. Too much silence. Sometimes Daniel wondered if building an empire had cost him something he could never buy back. As he walked toward his office, he heard a soft voice from the garden outside. "People think money solves everything, but it doesn't heal loneliness." Daniel stopped. That voice wasn't familiar. He moved quietly toward the glass doors and looked outside. Under the large oak tree in the backyard sat a young woman with a book resting on her knees. She was speaking softly, almost like she was thinking out loud. Daniel stepped outside. The woman looked up suddenly, startled. "Oh," she said, jumping to her feet. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were home." Daniel studied her for a moment before recognition dawned. "You're Maria's daughter," he said. She nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." Lena. Maria had worked in the mansion for years. She cleaned quietly, never caused trouble, and sometimes brought her daughter along on weekends. But Daniel had rarely noticed the girl. Until now. "What are you reading?" he asked. She hesitated before holding up the book. "Psychology," she said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly light reading." Lena laughed awkwardly. "I like understanding how people think." Daniel crossed his arms, curious. "And what made you interested in that?" She looked down at the book for a moment before answering. "I guess, because I grew up watching people hide their pain." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "That's a heavy observation." Lena shrugged slightly. "My mom works very hard. Sometimes people treat her like she's invisible." She looked up and met his eyes directly. "But she always tells me not to judge people too quickly. Everyone is fighting a battle we can't see." Daniel was silent. For years he had attended meetings with politicians, billionaires, and celebrities. Yet somehow this quiet girl spoke with more honesty than all of them combined. "So," he said finally, "what do you want to do with psychology?" Her face brightened slightly. "I want to become a therapist." Daniel tilted his head. "That's a long road." "I know. And expensive." Her smile faded slightly. "Yes." There was a brief silence between them. Then Daniel said something that surprised even himself. "Come walk with me." They strolled slowly through the garden paths. "So tell me," Daniel said. "Why therapy?" Lena took a deep breath. Because when I was younger, my mom was struggling. Really struggling. She worked 3 jobs sometimes. Daniel listened quietly. One night, Lena continued softly, I found her crying in the kitchen after midnight. I asked what was wrong, but she said nothing. She looked at him. But I could tell she felt alone. Daniel felt a strange heaviness in his chest. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, Lena said, I'd help people who feel like they have no one to talk to. Daniel nodded slowly. That's admirable. She smiled shyly. What about you? Me? Yes. Why did you start your company? Daniel chuckled quietly. That's a long story. I like long stories. He looked out toward the distant city lights. When I was 17, he said quietly, I was homeless. Lena's eyes widened. You're serious? Completely. He leaned against the railing. I slept on park benches in Chicago. Sometimes in subway stations. She stared at him. But, you're a billionaire. Now, he said with a faint smile. There was silence for a moment. What changed? Lena asked softly. Daniel looked up at the sky. A janitor. A janitor? He worked in an office building downtown. One night he caught me trying to sleep in the stairwell. Lena leaned forward slightly. I thought he was going to call security. What happened? Daniel smiled faintly. He handed me a sandwich. Lena blinked. That's it? No, Daniel said quietly. He also gave me a key to a storage room and said, everyone deserves a second chance, kid. Lena felt tears sting her eyes. That's beautiful. Daniel shrugged. That man saved my life. They stood there quietly for a moment. Then Lena said something unexpected. Do you ever feel lonely? Daniel looked at her sharply. Why would you ask that? She shrugged. Just a feeling. He exhaled slowly. Yes. The word surprised even him. Yes, he repeated. And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter realized he was having a conversation that felt real. Over the next few weeks, something unusual began happening. Daniel started coming home earlier. At first he told himself it was because work had slowed down. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was hoping to see Lena again. One evening he found her in the library. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by books. You know, Daniel said from the doorway, most people use chairs. Lena jumped. Oh. Sorry. Daniel laughed softly. You don't have to apologize every time you see me. She stood up awkwardly. I just don't want to cause trouble. You're not. He picked up one of the books. Neuroscience. She nodded. I'm trying to prepare for college. Daniel flipped through the pages. This material is pretty advanced. She sighed. I know. So why push yourself this hard? Lena hesitated. Because I can't afford to fail. Daniel studied her expression. Tell me something, he said. Yes. If money wasn't a problem, what would your dream life look like? Lena thought about it for a moment. I'd have a small office somewhere in the city. Maybe near a park. Daniel listened quietly. I'd help people who grew up like me. Meaning? Kids from struggling families. She looked down. Kids who feel like the world already decided they'll never succeed. Daniel leaned against the shelf. And you'd prove them wrong. She nodded. Yes. Daniel smiled faintly. You remind me of someone. Who? Me. And neither of them realized that those quiet conversations were slowly changing both of their lives forever. But the world outside that peaceful mansion garden was not kind to stories like theirs. And soon, everything would explode. The conversations between Daniel and Lena slowly became the one part of his life he began to look forward to. At first it was accidental. Then it became intentional. Some evenings Daniel would arrive home from work and immediately glance toward the garden before even stepping inside the mansion. If he saw Lena sitting beneath the oak tree with a book in her lap, something inside him relaxed. One evening he walked out to find her staring at the sunset, her book closed beside her. "You're not studying tonight?" Daniel asked. Lena smiled faintly. "My brain needed a break." Daniel sat on the bench across from her. "Fair enough. Even billionaires need breaks." She tilted her head. "Do you actually take any?" Daniel chuckled. "Not many." "Why?" He looked out across the hills of Beverly Hills. "Because when you build something from nothing, you're always afraid it can disappear just as fast." Lena watched him quietly. "That sounds exhausting." Daniel shrugged. "It is." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Lena said softly, "You know something?" "What?" "You're not what I expected." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly did you expect?" "A cold billionaire who only cares about money." Daniel laughed out loud. "Most people still think that." "Well," Lena said, smiling slightly, "I think you're just a man who worked very hard and forgot how to rest." Daniel stared at her. "You say things no one else would dare say to me." "That's because I'm not trying to impress you." The honesty in her voice was disarming. Daniel shook his head slowly. "You're dangerous." "Dangerous?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you tell the truth." Lena laughed. "I think the world could use more truth." Daniel didn't answer. But deep down, he knew she was right. Over the following weeks their conversations became longer. Sometimes they talked about books. Sometimes about childhood memories. Sometimes about the strange ways people treated money and power. One night Lena asked something unexpected. "Can I ask you a question?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You've asked several already." "Go ahead." "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you have everything people dream about." Daniel stared at the dark sky for a long moment. Finally he said quietly, "Success feels different from happiness." Lena listened carefully. "Success is loud," Daniel continued. "Headlines. Money. Attention. And happiness? Happiness is quiet." He glanced at her. Moments like this. Lena felt her heart skip. But she quickly looked away. Because deep down she knew something dangerous was happening. They were getting too close. And the world they lived in would never accept it. A few days later Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He walked into the kitchen where Maria was finishing her cleaning. "Maria," he said. She turned quickly. "Oh, Mr. Carter. I didn't hear you come in. I have a corporate gathering next weekend." Maria nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I'd like Lena to attend." Maria froze. "I'm sorry." Daniel spoke calmly. "She's intelligent and interesting. I think she'd enjoy meeting some people." Maria's face turned pale. "Sir, with respect, that might not be a good idea." "Why not?" Maria hesitated. "Because those people, they don't see the world the way you do." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Maria sighed. "People with that kind of money often believe they're better than everyone else." Daniel said nothing. Because deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong. "Please think carefully about this," Maria said gently. Daniel nodded. "I will." But later that evening he walked into the garden where Lena was studying again. "Busy?" he asked. "Always," she replied with a grin. Daniel sat down beside her. I have an invitation for you. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. That sounds dangerous. There's a corporate party here next weekend. And I want you to come. Lena stared at him like he had just suggested something insane. You can't be serious. I am. She shook her head immediately. No. Why? Because I don't belong there. Daniel leaned forward. Who decides where someone belongs? Society. Society is often wrong. Lena crossed her arms. Daniel, your guests are billionaires, investors, celebrities. So I'm the housekeeper's daughter. Daniel's voice softened. You're also one of the smartest people I know. That won't matter to them. Then maybe they need to learn something. Lena sighed. You're stubborn. I've been told that. She looked down at her book for a moment. What would I even wear? Daniel smiled slightly. We'll figure that out. For the next few days Lena tried to convince herself it was a terrible idea. But Daniel's quiet confidence kept echoing in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, it would be okay. The night of the party arrived. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Valets rushed around in black suits. Inside the mansion, soft jazz music floated through the air while servers carried trays of champagne. Lena stood upstairs in front of a mirror wearing a simple blue dress. Her hands trembled slightly. Maria adjusted the necklace around her neck. You look beautiful, her mother said softly. Lena swallowed. I feel like I'm about to walk into a lion's den. Maria touched her shoulder. Remember who you are. Lena nodded slowly. Downstairs, Daniel greeted investors and executives with his usual calm confidence. But his eyes kept drifting toward the staircase. Finally he saw her. For a moment he forgot what he was saying mid-conversation. Lena walked down the stairs slowly. The blue dress shimmered gently under the lights. Her natural curls framed her face, and her nervous smile made her look both elegant and vulnerable at the same time. Daniel's business partner leaned toward him. Who is that? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because in that moment he realized something that scared him. He wasn't just curious about Lena anymore. He cared about her. Deeply. Daniel walked across the room toward the staircase. Lena's heart pounded as he approached. You look incredible, he said quietly. She laughed nervously. I feel like everyone is staring at me. That's because they are. Great, she muttered. Daniel extended his arm. Come on. Where are we going? To meet people. Lena took a deep breath and placed her hand lightly on his arm. The moment they stepped into the center of the room, whispers began spreading. Who is she? Is that his girlfriend? I've never seen her before. Daniel introduced her calmly to several investors. This is Lena. She smiled politely, answering questions with intelligence and grace. For a while, things seemed to go surprisingly well. Until someone else noticed. Across the room stood Vanessa Whitmore. The daughter of one of Daniel's largest investors. Tall, elegant, and accustomed to always being the most important woman in the room. She watched Daniel laughing with Lena. Her eyes narrowed. Vanessa walked slowly toward them, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Well, she said loudly as she approached. Daniel, aren't you going to introduce your guest properly? Daniel turned. Vanessa. This is Lena. Vanessa looked Lena up and down slowly. Her smile was cold. Oh, she said. I know who she is. The room began to grow quiet. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. Isn't she the maid's daughter? Several guests exchanged awkward glances. Lena felt her stomach drop. Vanessa laughed softly and lifted her champagne glass. How progressive of you, Daniel, she continued. Inviting staff family members to billionaire parties. A few people chuckled uncomfortably. Lena felt her face burn with humiliation. Daniel's expression darkened. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned closer to Lena and said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Tell me something, dear, do you also clean the house with your mother?" The laughter this time was louder. And Lena felt something inside her break. Without saying another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit. Daniel watched her go. And suddenly the room full of powerful people felt colder than any place he had ever stood. He looked around slowly at the laughing guests. Then he set his champagne glass down on the table. And walked out after her. Daniel pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the cool night air. The music and laughter from inside the mansion faded behind him, replaced by the quiet sound of the wind brushing through the trees. "Lena," he called. She was already halfway down the stone pathway leading toward the gate. Her steps were quick, almost desperate. "Lena, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. Daniel walked closer until he was standing just a few feet behind her. When she finally turned to face him, her eyes were shining with tears she was trying desperately to hold back. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Sorry? For what?" "For ruining your party." "You didn't ruin anything." She laughed bitterly. "You heard what she said." "Yes, I did." And everyone laughed. Daniel clenched his jaw. Those people laugh at anything that makes them feel superior. Lena shook her head. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Her voice trembled. "I grew up watching my mom work harder than anyone I know. She cleaned houses for people like them." Daniel listened quietly. "And they treated her like she didn't exist," Lena continued. "Like she was invisible." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Tonight they looked at me the same way." Daniel's chest tightened. "Lena. I knew this was a mistake," she said softly. "I told you I didn't belong there." Daniel stepped closer. "Those people don't decide where you belong." "Maybe not to you," she said. "But to the rest of the world, they do." For a moment the two of them stood there in silence. Then Lena took a deep breath. "I should go home." Daniel looked at her carefully. "Are you leaving because of them?" "I'm leaving because I don't want to embarrass you." The words hit him harder than he expected. "You could never embarrass me," he said firmly. Lena gave a small, sad smile. "You say that now." She turned and continued walking toward the gate. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the night. Then something inside him snapped. He turned around and marched straight back into the mansion. The moment he stepped inside, the conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. Vanessa was standing near the bar laughing with a group of investors. When she saw Daniel approaching, her smile widened. "Well," she said casually, "I suppose the help finally remembered their place." Daniel stopped a few feet away from her. The entire room slowly began to quiet down again. "Say that again," Daniel said calmly. Vanessa blinked. "I said the help remembered there." "I heard you," Daniel interrupted. The room fell silent. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Oh please, Daniel. Don't tell me you're actually upset. You humiliated her." Vanessa laughed. "She humiliated herself by showing up here." Daniel's voice dropped lower. "She was my guest." "And I'm your future," Vanessa replied confidently. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa leaned closer and whispered just loud enough for others to hear. "Or have you forgotten that my father owns 20% of your company?" Daniel stared at her. "You think that gives you the right to treat people like trash?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Daniel, she's a maid's daughter." The words echoed through the room. Daniel slowly looked around at the crowd. Dozens of wealthy faces watched the scene with curiosity, amusement, or indifference. Not one of them had defended Lena. Not one. And suddenly Daniel realized something that made his stomach turn. These were the people he had built his entire life around. The same type of people who once looked at him like he was nothing when he was homeless. Daniel turned back to Vanessa. "Leave," he said quietly. She frowned. "I'm sorry." "Leave my house." A stunned silence spread across the room. Vanessa laughed nervously. "You're joking." "I'm not." "Daniel." "Now." Vanessa's face turned red. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." She looked around the room, expecting someone to support her. No one spoke. Finally she grabbed her purse angrily. "You're making a huge mistake," she snapped. Daniel didn't respond. Vanessa stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. A few moments later the front door slammed. Daniel turned back toward the guests. For a moment no one moved. Then one investor cleared his throat. "Well, that was unexpected." Daniel looked at him coldly. "Party's over." "What?" "You heard me." Several guests stared at him in disbelief. "Daniel," another executive said carefully, "there are important people here." Daniel nodded. "Yes." And apparently none of them know how to treat others with basic respect. The room remained frozen. Finally Daniel walked toward the door. "I suggest you all find your drivers." One by one the guests began leaving, whispering among themselves. Within 30 minutes the mansion was empty. The silence returned. But this time it felt different. Daniel stood alone in the living room staring at the doorway Lena had walked through earlier. He grabbed his car keys. 15 minutes later his black Tesla pulled up in front of a modest apartment building across town. The neighborhood was quiet, far removed from the luxury of Beverly Hills. Daniel stepped out and walked toward the entrance. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. A few seconds later it opened. Lena stood there, still wearing the blue dress. Her eyes widened in shock. "Daniel?" "Hi. What are you doing here? Can I come in?" She stepped aside silently. The small apartment was simple but warm. A couch, a small dining table, books stacked neatly against the walls. Maria was sitting at the kitchen table and immediately stood up when she saw him. "Mr. Carter." Daniel shook his head gently. "Please, call me Daniel." Maria looked confused but nodded. "Is everything all right?" Daniel turned toward Lena. "I came to apologize." Lena blinked. "You don't have anything to apologize for." "Yes, I do." He ran a hand through his hair. "I should have known how those people would react. It's not your fault. But I brought you into that situation." Maria spoke softly. "Some people reveal their true character when they think they're better than others." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's exactly what happened tonight." Lena folded her arms. "Daniel, why does this matter so much to you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because 10 years ago I was the person they laughed at." The room grew quiet. "When I was homeless," Daniel continued, "people walked past me like I was invisible." Lena listened carefully. "I remember standing outside a restaurant one winter night watching people eat inside while I froze on the sidewalk." His voice tightened slightly. "Do you know what one man said to his friend when he saw me?" Lena shook her head. "He said, people like that deserve their situation." Maria gasped softly. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I promised myself that if I ever succeeded, I would never become like those people." He looked directly at Lena. "Tonight reminded me how easy it is to forget." Lena's eyes softened. "You didn't forget." "Maybe I almost did." There was a long silence. Then Lena said quietly, "Why did you really come here?" Daniel hesitated. Because the answer scared him. Finally he spoke. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And if I wasn't? Then I would stay until you were. Their eyes locked. And in that moment both of them realized something neither had dared say out loud yet. The night had changed everything. But the storm surrounding their lives was only beginning. Lena looked down at the floor, trying to steady the storm of emotions inside her. Daniel was standing in her small living room, the same man who appeared on magazine covers and business news channels, yet right now he looked nothing like the untouchable billionaire the world admired. He looked human. Maria quietly excused herself and stepped into the kitchen, sensing that the two of them needed space to talk. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. Finally Lena broke the silence. You shouldn't have come. Daniel frowned slightly. Why not? Because people like you don't just show up at places like this. Daniel glanced around the apartment. What's wrong with this place? Nothing, Lena said quickly. But it's not your world. Daniel shook his head slowly. You keep saying that. Because it's true. He took a few steps closer. You think the world I came from looked like my mansion? Lena didn't answer. Daniel gestured toward the small apartment. This place is closer to my childhood than anything I live in now. She looked up at him. You told me you were homeless. Yes. But you never said how bad it was. Daniel exhaled slowly. Bad enough that I sometimes went 2 days without eating. Lena's eyes widened. And bad enough that one winter night I almost froze sleeping behind a grocery store. The room went quiet. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I don't talk about it much. Why not? Because people don't like uncomfortable stories. Lena stared at him. I do. Daniel gave a faint smile. That's one of the reasons I like talking to you. Her heart skipped. But she quickly pushed the feeling aside. Daniel, what happened tonight is exactly why this can't work. What can't work? She hesitated before saying the words. Whatever this is between us. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. You think I care about what those people think? It's not just them, Lena said. It's your investors. Your company. Your reputation. Daniel laughed quietly. My reputation survived worse than a few snobby billionaires. You're not listening, Lena said, frustration rising in her voice. No, he replied calmly. You're the one not listening. She folded her arms. Then explain it to me. Daniel stepped closer until they were only a few feet apart. When I was homeless, he said quietly, I used to walk past a tech store every day. Lena listened carefully. There was a computer in the window displaying stock prices and business news. He smiled faintly. I had no idea what any of it meant. But you learned. Yes. How? Daniel shrugged. Public libraries. Free internet. Lots of trial and error. Lena shook her head in disbelief. That's incredible. Daniel looked at her seriously. The point is, the world kept telling me I didn't belong in places like that. He paused. But I went anyway. Their eyes met. Just like you walked into that party tonight. Lena looked away. That was different. Why? Because you invited me. And I meant it. Her voice softened. You don't understand how people like Vanessa think. Daniel's jaw tightened. Oh, I understand perfectly. What do you mean? I know exactly how they see the world. And I don't care. Lena stared at him. You're saying that now. I'll still be saying it tomorrow. And next week? Yes. And next year? Daniel stepped even closer. Yes. The certainty in his voice made her heart race. She whispered, why? The answer came without hesitation. Because you matter to me. The words hung in the air. Lena felt like the room had suddenly become too small. You don't mean that. I do. You barely know me. I know enough. She shook her head slowly. You're confusing curiosity with something deeper. Daniel's voice dropped. No. What makes you so sure? He smiled softly. Because I've spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from me. And you're the first person who never asked for anything. Lena swallowed. That doesn't mean. You listened to me when no one else cared. Her voice trembled. That's what friends do. Daniel shook his head. No. That's what someone special does. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Lena whispered, Daniel, this is dangerous. Why? Because if this goes wrong, it could ruin both our lives. Daniel shrugged. Most things worth having involve risk. You're talking like a businessman again. No, he said gently. I'm talking like a man who finally realized what he's been missing. Lena's eyes filled with emotion. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. How? Daniel reached out slowly and took her hand. Because feelings don't care about social status. Her heart pounded. Daniel. Before she could finish, Maria returned quietly from the kitchen. She looked at the two of them standing close together. For a moment she said nothing. Then she sighed. Life has a funny way of surprising us. Both of them turned toward her. Maria walked closer. Mr. Carter. Daniel, he reminded her. Daniel, she corrected gently. I've watched my daughter grow up believing the world would never give her the opportunities others have. Lena looked embarrassed. Mom. Maria raised her hand softly. Let me finish. She looked at Daniel. And I've watched powerful people treat others like they're invisible. Daniel nodded. I know. Maria studied his face carefully. But tonight you came here. Yes. You didn't have to. No, he admitted. She smiled faintly. That tells me something about your character. Lena whispered nervously, Mom. Maria turned to her daughter. Sometimes life opens doors we never expected. And sometimes those doors lead to heartbreak, Lena replied quietly. Maria placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's true. She then looked back at Daniel. But fear should never be the reason we close them. The room grew silent again. Daniel squeezed Lena's hand slightly. I'm not asking for promises, he said softly. I'm just asking for a chance. Lena looked at him. Really looked at him. The billionaire. The former homeless boy.